You know, there's really a lot in a name. In the Bible, names especially mean a lot about the people that have them, most of the time. Abraham's name literally means father of many nations. Does anyone here recall God saying that Abraham would be the father of many nations?
Yes.
Looking back a little further, at a less positive moment in Scripture, a name really brings the purpose of a story and a person to light. The story of Cain and Abel. Rather being read as a simple name, Abel's name in Hebrew, which is the original language of the story, means vanity, like futility or emptiness. So it's Cain and his brother, futility, who ends up dying about as quickly as he's introduced in the Bible. His name anticipates his futile and fruitless life, where he's murdered by his brother Cain, and he doesn't really do much else. In our gospel text today, it's a kind of about naming a child, but it's really about more than just naming a child. It's about telling us something about Christ. And unlike poor Abel, the names given to the one who would both be and show us the way are of extraordinary consequence. The naming really stuck out to me at first, but it didn't really stick out to me because it's belabored in the story. It stuck out to me for a pretty unromantic reason. It stuck out to me because as I read over it, I was a little bit confused. When you look at verses 21 and 23 together, they basically say, "It was once written that a child would be born, and he would be named Emmanuel." So they named the kid Jesus. And I couldn't quite figure that one out. I had to pray on that one for a minute. The placement of these verses together, however, isn't some kind of flub or mistake on the part of the person who wrote the gospel. Not at all. The whole story is a way of expressing the profound importance of the person and way of Christ. And you know, okay, Jesus has a couple of names. I have a bunch of names. Henry, Caleb, Coleman, Tabor, right? So, the gospel writer was so profoundly touched by the life and person of Christ that there was no other way of expressing it. In this person is Jesus, Yeshua, or Joshua, except we usually say Jesus instead of Joshua, meaning one who saves, and Emmanuel, which means God is with us. One who saves, God is with us. That's the two names. The beginning of the gospel sort of gives away the point of the rest of the gospel. The way of Jesus saves, and he is the sign of God's nearness. One might call these the two great points of Christianity and God's answers to our deepest longings to know that we are whole or healed or saved, and that we, in this world that is so difficult, are not actually alone. And Christmas is about celebrating both Jesus, God saving, and Emmanuel, God being with us. But the name Emmanuel comes first chronologically in the Bible, not necessarily in the gospel reading, but in the Bible. It's from the prophecy of Isaiah. So let's think about what it means when we say God is with us. I personally believe that God is always present, always around us, always within us. But I also believe that God is present particularly in concentrated ways. Specific moments when we have those aha moments or those mystical moments in prayer or in church when you feel very connected to God. Moments when we baptize a child or when we take communion or when a person breathes their last breath. We call those sacramental moments. Those moments when our mundane lives and the heavenly presence of God who is always around us finally merge as the single reality they have always been, only we're generally too busy and distracted to notice it. In the text today, it tells us that Jesus will be here soon, and that will be one of those concentrated moments of God's presence. And in the story, the air is already thick with the signs that God is doing something. something interesting, something different, something important. The dreams of the righteous are already troubled by God's Spirit as it moves and stirs souls, and God troubles their souls with words of prophecy whispered by voices from heaven, speaking of impossible conceptions and of apparitions of the Most High among the bottom rung of that society. Yes, a great life is coming into the world, but it's not coming in a way that anybody thinks it is going to happen. God works a lot of times in ways that are not just unexpected, but are in ways and places that we think God wouldn't dare go. Where we think God is absent, or we really think God has no business being, especially if God is a decent person. In ways that make no sense to us, or in ways that are absurd and confound everything that we know about what is reasonable and rational. And this isn't because God is unreasonable or irrational. The creator of this vast cosmos is anything but that. Quite the contrary. It's because of this reason and rationality that we build, that we occasionally need to have it broken down a little bit, busted apart, or sometimes even laid waste to, so that divine inspiration can build something a little better and more beautiful and more brilliant than what we might have ever conceived on our own. God's news is good news, but remember, good news isn't always normal news, and it isn't always welcome news. It scares us sometimes. It scares me. And if I had to guess, the very thought probably scares you too. And we're not the only ones. Not long after this beautiful story, where the name of Christ is whispered to his earthly Father in a holy dream, we sort of pan across the nation to the royal palace, where old King Herod is getting nervous because God is at work. You see, King Herod was a man who didn't dream of divine things like Joseph, but he clung heavily to his own delusions of grandeur, as if they were divinely appointed. Herod looked in the places where God was working, in those low down and dirty and common places that were filled with poor folks and social outcasts and women and livestock, people he wouldn't even let in his presence back then. And he was afraid. And if you keep reading, you'll find out what rich and powerful people do when they're afraid, when they feel like the lowly are being raised up and the mighty are being brought low, as Mary says in her Magnificat. King Herod begins the slaughter of the innocent children because he's worried someone's coming for his power. As well he should have been, because it was God himself who was coming. But fortunately for us, our text today shows us how to resist that fear and the twisting of the soul. The chosen one in this story isn't the one of divinely appointed power, but please don't tell the bishop I said that. The chosen one here is the common person, the normal person, the person who's just trying to make life happen, the person who's just living paycheck to paycheck and trying to come home every day without like a most throbbing headache you've ever had, and wants to prop his feet up and wants to just kind of get a break from everything that's going on. It's Joseph, the young man who's just trying to make a normal life in this busy, crazy world. And then God barges in with some strange plan and shakes Joseph to his core. Still, unlike many of the prophets, Joseph doesn't really argue or run. Joseph does in the Gospel of Matthew basically what Mary does in the Gospel of Luke. After the angel reveals what the plan of God is, he just gives a simple, okay, I can do that. Probably why they made a pretty decent couple. There's no struggling with the currents of divine flow, no trying to outrun God like the prophet Jonah, or crying about it all the time like the prophet Jeremiah, or killing a bunch of innocent people like King Herod. He just says, it's okay, I'll do it. Great, you may be thinking, but why is this story so important to us now? Because this story, the scripture, is about normal people doing extraordinary things, showing how Christ lives up to his other name, Jesus, the one who saves. Let's take Joseph again. Joseph would have been laughed at for his role here because it would not have been right to stay with Mary. He would have to overcome the social pressure to dump Mary and move on to a decent woman who wasn't already pregnant before they were married. right? She would have made him a laughingstock with his friends. She would have totally embarrassed his family. She was a trashy something or other, and I can't believe you're even hanging out with her, much less thinking about marrying her. But Joseph overcame the social pressure to do that. He understood that there's a difference in righteousness and social politics. Joseph was a person who could help, and Joseph was a person who did help. And then there's Mary. She's a single woman who faced perhaps even death because of an unwed pregnancy. Do y'all remember the woman who was caught in extramarital sex in the Bible and they were going to stone her to death, and then Jesus said, don't do it? Everybody kind of forgets that when they think about the story of the virgin birth and Mary being pregnant before she gets married, but she could have well been stoned to death. I want you to think about that. She took that risk too when the angel said, I am going to announce something to you, and God is going to move over you in this way, and you are going to be pregnant before you even get married to Joseph. You could get in some real trouble here, Mary. But she says, it's okay. I'll do it because I know God is with me. And the two of them made use of social conventions, and they passed through society as if they were nothing special at all, but at the same time they were busting those social conventions at the seams. Because God doesn't fit in a box, and the people of God don't either. And if we have to break social conventions to do what's right, then so be it. The way of Jesus saves us from that social trap, calling us to be brave and break conventions if we must. Remember that story we talked about not long ago where they all went to lunch and Jesus said, hey, instead of sitting at the head of the table with the most honor, why don't you try sitting down at the foot of it? Break the social conventions. What's God calling you to do? We do that trusting in Jesus' other name. God is with us. God is with us in those moments when the high up take a step down and the downtrodden finally lift up their heads, when the marginalized and the oppressed say no, and those who decide that they can help actually do so. They actually help people who are in need. In the life and way of Jesus, we are saved from estrangement from one another and from God. We're saved from the temptations and evils of this life, which will ultimately ruin our relationships and stain our souls. God is with us, and God is saving us from the things that seek to destroy us. That is the message of Christmas. That's the reason why we sing and why we're joyful, and we commemorate the birth of a little baby to a couple of poor unmarried Jews in the ancient Middle East. As we get ready for Christmas, I want you to think about how weird this holiday really is. A bunch of people, thousands of years later, a whole world away, are lifting up this family which we have nothing in common with. But they're a total inspiration to us now. That's what we're going to do soon. But we're not quite at Christmas yet. Right now, we're still in Advent, and we're good Episcopalians, so we don't put the liturgical cart before the horse. We'll celebrate all that great stuff soon and very soon, but for right now, I want you to do what Advent and the reading this morning really ask us to do. Wait and think and pray and look. Consider all of the ways in which you don't want God to work in your life, and try looking there and see if the Spirit's moving. Think about the ways in which your life needs to be shaken up for the better, and listen there for the whispers of heaven urging you to be bold and take that step that you need to take, but maybe you've been avoiding it. Think about the ways in which this message offers comfort in what might be a difficult time of year for you, because holidays can be difficult. Remember that you are loved and you are not alone. Right now, in Advent, we should all take a break from the holiday chaos and sit with our saving God, who is nearer to us than we are to ourselves, and be comforted by this graceful message of the holy names of Christ. Emmanuel, God is with us, and Jesus, God saves us, even if that saving comes in an unexpected, unwanted, or impossible way. Amen.